Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. President Trump announces a ceasefire in the Middle East, but Iran has continued to fire missiles in the past few hours. It says it will halt fighting if Israel does the same. Oil continues its slide after a roller coaster session that briefly took prices below their pre-conflict level. US and European stocks look set to gain at today's open. Plus, Donald Trump heads to the NATO Summit with the UK pledging to ramp up defence spending to 5% of GDP. But Pedro Sanchez holds out, saying Spain cannot commit to the target. Good morning. Checking in on the markets then, as investors seem to be taking President Trump at his word as we continue, of course, to monitor lines in terms of further Iranian missile strikes on and targeting Israel, as the Associated Press reports that Israel's skies are closed to planes until further notice. We did see a rally in US stocks by the end of the close yesterday on what was seen as a largely symbolic strike in terms of missiles targeting that key US base in Qatar. Those missiles were intercepted. US markets ended up around 1%. European futures now on the front foot, looking to gain 1.3%. FTSE 100 futures looking to add 30 points. S&P futures then stateside looking to build on the gains of yesterday, up 0.6%. It is risk on across these equity markets. Nasdaq 100 futures pointing to gains of 0.8%. Let's flip the board and have a look cross asset. The focus, of course, continues to be on oil. Prices slumping right now in terms of Brent below $70 a barrel, 2.6% lower in terms of the percentage move. You had seen a drop of around 6% at the start of trading today. Below $70 a barrel on Brent. We'll see how that story evolves, of course. Across the Asian session, you've also seen some solid gains as investors in that part of the world breathe a sigh of relief. Up 2% on the benchmark MSCI Asia Pacific. Gold selling off down 0.6% in that safe haven yellow metal, of course. And euro dollar, the single currency, up 0.2% on dollar weakness in the session. Euro dollar at 1.16. So Iran and Israel appear to be nearing a pause in their 12-day war. President Trump announcing a ceasefire between the two countries. However, Israel is yet to officially respond to the announcement. Iran's foreign minister says his country had no intention of retaliating against Israeli attacks after the early morning hours. But Israel's military says Tehran has fired multiple waves of missiles this morning, killing at least 3 people. For more, we are joined now by Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East anchor, Jumana Basachi. Jumana, what is the latest then on this apparent truce?
Let me tell you what we know. Around 6 hours ago, President Trump put up a post on Truth Social where he announced this ceasefire. A bit of a surprise that ostensibly the U.S. had negotiated between Israel and Iran. He said that it was set to go into effect 1 hour ago. So that was 1 hour from where we're sitting right now. But as of yet, we've had no official commentary from Israel. And the only thing we have to go by from the Iranian standpoint is that post that you just referenced now that the foreign minister put up, saying that there had been no ceasefire agreement, but they had no intention to keep responding to Israeli attacks after 4 a.m. Tehran time. Now, obviously, that window has already passed. And in the last couple of hours, Israel have reported that there are ongoing missiles being directed at Israel from Iran. They've identified the 6th wave of missiles a short while ago. AP also just announcing that Israel's skies are closed to planes until further notice per the airport authority. So it is very unclear, Tom, at this juncture, whether this ceasefire that President Trump touted a couple of hours ago has actually gone into effect, whether either sides are respecting it, or whether indeed they have plans to actually sign on to it. So it's still a very fluid situation. Of course, markets are behaving as though the bulk of the regional uncertainty is behind us. But as is ever in this region, we have to keep an eye on developments and what happens in the next few hours.
Also, Jumana, on that point, given you have covered the twists and turns of this conflict since June the 13th, what are you and the team watching out for in the hours and days ahead?
Look, the most important thing is to see whether, one, this ceasefire actually upholds, and if it does uphold, whether it's going to be a lasting ceasefire. The second point is what Iran has to say vis-a-vis their nuclear ambitions. If you go back to that Truth Social post that President Trump put up in the early hours of this morning, he warned that the U.S. could go down the route of additional strikes if Iran does not negotiate a deal to restrict its nuclear program. Future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier. He is using strength to bring Iran back to the negotiating table once again and perhaps push them for even more stringent concessions. And the question at this point is whether the Iranian regime are actually willing to negotiate, because remember, over the weekend, the Iranian foreign minister said that the door to diplomacy is now closed. And two, if they do come back to the negotiating table, what are the concessions that they're going to sign up for? And are those going to be, A, acceptable to the U.S., but then also acceptable to Israel as well? Because Israel, from their perspective, had a couple of war objectives. One, eliminating Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Number two, ensuring that they don't build a weapon. And if the corollary of that was an ultimate change in regime, they would not be unsupportive. So the question is whether also from Israel's standpoint, they have achieved enough in terms of military success to call this war a success in whole and actually sign on to that ceasefire. So these are questions that we're going to be asking in the coming days, Tom.
Yes, significant questions that, as you say, need to be answered to get more clarity in terms of whether or not this ceasefire holds and diplomacy can move forward. Bloomberg's Jemana Pasechi on the ground, of course, in Dubai with the latest for us. Jemana, thank you. To the oil markets right now, oil extending then its slump following that announcement from President Trump of a tentative ceasefire then between Iran and Israel. Joining us for more on the oil markets is Bloomberg oil reporter Nicholas Loire. Nicholas, why is oil retracing some of its losses? We saw a big slump at the start of the session. That has moderated. Brent still below $70 a barrel.
Right, exactly. So, Tom, I think the jubilation of an early morning in Asia that saw prices in Brent fall almost 5%. Now we've retraced some of that. We're looking at something like losses of like minus 2.7%. And I think that's because following the jubilation, it's becoming clear that much remains murky. As Jemana has already showed us, I think we've seen missiles coming out of Iran since the announcement of the supposed ceasefire. There is no timeline that's been kept to. And I think, as we can see, like much remains to be heard from Israel, which has so far, as you've rightly pointed out, remained quiet. So I think part of that uncertainty is adding to where markets are. And I think that's all going to be closely watched as the day progresses.
What factors specifically do you expect the oil market investors in that space to be zeroing in on in the hours and days ahead?
So I would say that right now tensions are still high. There is still uncertainty about whether there might be further escalations or developments in the Middle East. And that's, I think, bullish factors we must all be paying attention to. But more broadly, I think people are remembering that fundamentals are a key part of this market, and fundamentals are starting to rear their head again. Let me bring you back to how OPEC has already announced multiple supersized quota increases that are adding to supply in the second half of the year. So I would say that given that Iran's oil refining capacity has been minimally hit, I think we're actually destined for a flabby Q2, and I think those concerns will weigh on people's minds as the oil market prices moving forward.
OK, Bloomberg oil reporter Nicholas Loire, thank you very much indeed for how oil markets are adjusting to this news of a potential truce between Iran and Israel. Let's get more on the market reaction and start off with oil, and then we get to the equity market moves. And of course, we are risk on across these equities. Let's bring in Valerie Teitel, who's been doing a deep dive, of course, in these markets. Talk to us about the oil market impact then, and just in that historical context, at least in short-term historical context, from that 12-day start on June the 13th, Friday, June the 13th of this Israeli attack on Iran, and how the oil pricing has evolved. It's been very volatile.
It's been very volatile, but oh boy, the last two sessions, a near 10% drop in Brent has really seen us return basically to pre-war levels. We're on a 69 handle in Brent. That's basically where we were on the 12th of June, the day before the first Israeli attacks against Iran. We do have some way to work down due to the fact that on the 11th of June, there was a spike in oil prices on the basis basis of nations closing their embassies in the Middle East. So we haven't retraced totally back to maybe pre-Middle East jitter levels, but it's definitely made a huge dent in the last two sessions, down some 10%. To the equity market, ever since we saw that Iran action on that U.S. airbase in Qatar that was largely seen as symbolic, S&P futures had jumped near 2%, Tom. And if we look at the broader index, the broader S&P 500 index, we're 1.5% away from all-time highs. So that's something we could maybe breach just this week if this positivity around the Middle East tensions dropping quite quickly. We're also seeing global equities in the green. Euro stocks up over 1%. It was a very positive session in Asia with the MSCI Asia Pacific index up 2% as well. It was a good day for the dollar in terms of the fact that we erased a lot of those aggressive rise in the U.S. dollar yesterday. Dollar softening has really been the name of the game alongside the tensions declining in the last 12 hours.
Yeah, and the Bloomberg dollar index is down 0.3% right now. Euro up at 116. I just want to bring you these lines, Val, and we can fold this in terms of the market reaction and then throw forward to what we expect to hear from the Fed Chair, Jay Powell. But lines crossing right now on the Bloomberg terminal. This is President Trump posting on Truth Social again. This is we try to understand the exact timing and nature of this apparent ceasefire between Iran and Israel. President Trump says the ceasefire is now in effect. This is after a salvo of additional missiles were fired by Iran, detected by the IDF just in the last 30 minutes or so. President Trump saying the ceasefire is now in effect, and he says do not violate it. Apparently a message, of course, to both sides in this conflict. Trump warning not to violate that ceasefire in this Truth Social post, and again saying that ceasefire is now in effect. We continue, of course, to monitor any lines from Iran and Israel to see if they confirm what the US president is saying. So this presumably, as we look at oil prices still lower, as you said, 2.7% lower, currently Brent at $79 a barrel, $69 a barrel, below $70 a barrel. Of course, good news, arguably, for central bank governors, for Fed Chair Jay Powell.
Yeah, that's right, especially as Jay Powell is headed to Capitol Hill today. He begins his two-day testimony in front of the House and the Senate. This happens twice a year. We'll be looking out for his opening remarks, which are normally posted online a few hours before he sits down. If he says anything new on the rates and economic outlook, maybe unlikely given we just had a Fed press conference last week. I, for one, will be looking for comments on banking regulation. We know that we've heard a lot being leaked to the media about suspected SLR reform that will help banks hold treasuries on their balance sheet. But also keep an eye on political pressure. Will Republican lawmakers be as combative as Trump has been against Chair Powell? I assume you'll have Republican lawmakers aggressively asking him why he's not lowering rates in the face of inflation declining. So those are the two key things to watch out for. And it comes alongside maybe some beginning signs of divisions at the FOMC, Tom. We've had two Federal Reserve governors in the last 4 days say that a July cut is something they might support if we do see continued evidence on inflation. And funny enough, these two governors who are talking about a July cut, it's Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman. Tom, those are actually two Trump appointees to the Federal Reserve Board from his first term. OK, market's not pricing in that July cut, not right now, but they are pricing in 55 basis points by the end of the year. So still pricing in two cuts for the Fed. We listen out then for Jay Powell later today. Bloomberg's Value Hotel. Thank you very much indeed with the market reaction, of course, to the events in the Middle East and throwing ahead to that testimony from the Fed Chair. Here's what else to think about today then. 9 a.m. UK time, the German IFO business survey, so a gauge, of course, on the health of Europe's largest economy. At 3 p.m. UK time, the Bank of England's Andrew Bailey will give evidence, talking of central bank governors, to the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee. We will be watching that, of course. And at 3 p.m. UK time, Jay Powell will, as Valerie is saying, deliver his semi-annual policy testimony, and of course we'll be covering that for you. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go on the terminal. Coming up, we're going to get more analysis of the conflict in the Middle East and President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire. Iran expert Sahar Razavi from California State University, Sacramento, joins us with that analysis as the news continues to evolve at a rapid pace. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. President Trump says the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is now in effect, and in his post on Truth Social warned against violating it. Joining us now is Sahar Razavi, Director of the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center and Associate Professor of Political Science at California State University, Sacramento. Thank you so much for joining us, and what an important moment to get your analysis and your views, Sahar, and we appreciate your time. What do you make of this apparent ceasefire that President Trump has announced?
Thanks very much for having me on. The ceasefire thus far is confusing many observers. Both Israel and Iran are reporting missile strikes from each other. In the meantime, Iran has not confirmed, as you mentioned, that there is a ceasefire. Israel has also not confirmed that they've agreed to a ceasefire. Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, has said on social media that they have not agreed to a ceasefire, which is not surprising given that Trump had demanded unconditional surrender, and in order to save face, of course, they can't simply just agree to a ceasefire under this kind of pressure. But he did say that if Israel stops attacking them, they will also stop attacking Israel. Right now, it seems a little too early to tell, but to me, it seems like Trump is attempting to use this ceasefire announcement either as leverage to pressure Iran in order to be able to say, look, they haven't held up their end of a ceasefire, which in fact didn't exist in the first place, or it is more political theater in order to try to drum up pressure for both sides and create some kind of a win for him in order for him to be able to claim that as the immaculate deal maker that he is, that he was able to bring these people to the table and solve a problem that, in fact, he created in the first place.
And to be clear, it's your belief, or at least your view, is that even if there is a ceasefire, it won't be long-lasting. Are the conditions there now, given what Israel has achieved from its perspective in terms of its objectives, alongside the US, given how depleted Iran and its proxies are at least the ingredients there now potentially for a lasting ceasefire and diplomacy?
I don't think so, to be honest. Ceasefires are like any kind of diplomatic arrangement. They require not only trust, but mutual incentives for each side to hold to the ceasefire. So certainly Donald Trump has claimed that there has been massive damage to Iran's military capacity. We have not seen confirmation of that. Battle damage assessment takes weeks, if not months, and no one, including the IAEA, has been able to get in yet to see what damage has actually been done. As you mentioned, there are also proxies. Iran has a network of allies across the region that it can also lean on were its own military capabilities to be compromised to such an extent that they would not be able to strike back. At this point, there has been there have not been conditions set up for it to be mutually beneficial for Iran or Israel or the United States to stop their attacks. And in fact, every incentive is there for them to continue because none of the parties have been given a way out or an off-ramp, which would, for domestic consumption, make them look good, which is what they need, and for international image, also make them look strong. They need deterrence on the international level, but they also need to look as if, in order to maintain legitimacy, they need to look domestically as if they have the power to protect their own population, which is one of the central obligations and responsibilities of any government.
From the market's perspective, there was relief yesterday when Iran seemingly telegraphed their response, attacking that US base in Qatar, but apparently giving the US the heads up prior to that. Is that confidence then misplaced? Because there's a reading from this that Iran has decided to recalibrate and to dial back the tensions. They flagged this missile barrage against this US base, and it gave the US time, of course, to move their forces out of the way to harm. The missiles were intercepted by the Qataris. That was an attempt by Iran to de-escalate.
That's right. In fact, as of last night on another interview, I mentioned that both parties, in this case, I was talking about Iran and the United States, they were looking for win-win off-ramps in order to be able to de-escalate because neither party really wants a full-scale war. That was prior to the attack on the Qatari base, the US base in Qatar. And this is playing out exactly that way. Iran is essentially doing what they did in 2020 after the assassination of General Soleimani, when they did launch a counterattack, but they telegraphed it in such a way that there would be minimal damage and no casualties. They essentially did the same thing here so that they could symbolically claim that they did counterattack, that they launched a proportionate response. In fact, they went so far as to say that they recorded and announced that they launched the same number of missiles at the base in Qatar that the United States had launched against their 3 nuclear sites. If that's not a signal of their intentions as far as the meaning of the counterattack, then I don't know what could be more clear. Certainly, I think that they are trying to avoid, I think the Iran and the United States have indicated that they are trying to avoid a full-scale intensification of an all-out war, but it doesn't seem as if the conditions are in place to make this durable as of right now. That doesn't mean that it's not recoverable. It doesn't mean that those conditions cannot be put into place, but there needs to be incentives and there need to be channels for all of the involved parties to get what they need for, again, domestic and international image.
OK, Sahar, really important context on a day, of course, when we try and assess the viability of this apparent ceasefire. Sahar Razavi, director of the Iranian and Middle Eastern Studies Center at California State University, Sacramento. Thank you. Coming up, switching focus, Starbucks denies reports that it's planning to sell its China business. We have the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Happy Tuesday. Some lines crossing right now. Redhead across the terminal when it comes to the Spanish banking space. And this is around the bids, about a year old now, by BBVA to take over the smaller lender Banco Sabadell. Lines crossing right now that the Spanish government has tightened requirements on BBVA's Sabadell bid. This is according to a local Spanish newspaper, Vanguardia. We will try to get the details in terms of what that tightened requirement means and what the details are. But we know that the government has been opposed to this takeover. Regulators have been poring over the details of this, and now it seems, according to this report, that the Spanish government will be tightening the requirements of BBVA's bid for Banco Sabadell. A story we will continue to monitor for you, of course, as we get more details. Now, some other stories making the news today. Starbucks has denied a report that it's thinking of selling its China business. Caixin Global says the coffee chain has held talks with over a dozen potential partners, including private equity firms Hill House and Fountainvest, but Starbucks says it isn't considering a full sale. The brand has struggled in China due to weak consumption and local competition. The US Supreme Court has lifted a judge's order that requires people to be given 10 days' notice before they are deported to a third country. It's a win for President Trump, whose administration argued that a Massachusetts court usurped presidential authority. But it was a split decision, with dissenting Justice Sonia Sotomayor accusing the majority of rewarding lawlessness. Digital lender Zopa Bank is launching a UK bank account as it tries to compete with the likes of Revolut, Monzo and Chase UK on everyday banking. Zopa's Biscuit current account will offer cash back on some spending, interest rates of more than 7% on regular savings. Zopa gained its UK banking licence in 2020 and now has almost 1.5 million customers across savings and loans. Coming up, global airlines feel the brunt of the conflict in the Middle East, even as we weigh up a potential ceasefire. We look at the space. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. President Trump announces a ceasefire in the Middle East, but Iran has continued to fire missiles in the past few hours. It says it will halt fighting, if Israel does the same. Oil continues its slide after a rollercoaster session that briefly took prices below their pre-conflict level. US and European stocks look set to gain at today's open. Plus, Donald Trump heads to the NATO summit with the UK pledging to ramp up defence spending to 5% of GDP. But Pedro Sanchez holds out, saying Spain cannot commit to the target. So equity markets on the front foot. Oil is lower and the Bloomberg dollar index is selling off. The dollar is under pressure. European stocks looking for a solid session as those tensions appear to be easing in terms of the conflict between Iran and Israel, even as we await further clarity from both sides. European futures pointing up by 1.4%. FTSE 100 futures looking to add 35 points. S&P E-minis after a strong session on Wall Street yesterday with gains of around 1% for both the S&P and the Nasdaq 100, looking to add 0.6% so far in the session. Nasdaq 100 futures looking to add 187 points. Let's flip the board and have a look cross-asset then on this risk-on day for asset classes. MSCI Asia Pacific over in Asia has rallied 2% on the session. Brent is below $70 a barrel. It's falling now 3.3%. So the drop continues just in the last half an hour or so as President Trump has come out and said the ceasefire is now in effect. We continue, of course, to get confirmation, await confirmation from both Israel and Iran. Gold is selling off down 9% on the yellow metal, so that safe haven is getting a bit of a knock in the session today. And the dollar is down. Euro is up 0.3% versus the greenback at 116. Now, President Trump says the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is now in effect. As I mentioned in his post on Truth Social, he also warned against violating it. Let's get an update on the situation, which is evolving pretty quickly, with Bloomberg's Jemana Pasechi. Jemana, just get us up to speed in terms of the latest then on this apparent truce, this apparent ceasefire.
Well, President Trump has posted for the second time in 6 hours that there is a ceasefire. A short while ago, about 10 minutes ago, he posted saying the ceasefire is now in effect. Please do not violate it. But from what we understand, in the last couple of hours, there have been a series of attacks. IDF has said that Iran launched 6 waves of missile attacks towards Israel. A short while ago, the AP reported that Israel had closed its air skies, and we're now hearing that they could be actually on the verge of resuming and reopening them. But the death toll reported this morning has now climbed to 4 per AP. And equally, on the Iran side, we have heard of the air defense systems being activated. Now, all of that happened before Trump posted a couple of minutes ago. So maybe we should actually take him at his word that the ceasefire is about to go into effect. But we have no official confirmation yet from Israel. There's been no confirmation that Israel have actually agreed to the terms of a ceasefire. And all we have from the Iranian side as of yet is a post that the Iranian foreign minister put up overnight saying that they had no ceasefire agreement, but that they would stop military attacks on Israel after 4 a.m. Tehran time. And that obviously did not come about. So a post now from Trump warning both sides not to go down the route of violations. I should also say in the earlier post that President Trump put up announcing this original ceasefire, he also warned, and this is important for where this goes from here, that additional strikes could be forthcoming if Iran does not negotiate a deal to restrict its nuclear program. So yes, there's this big announcement of a ceasefire, but what happens from here, Tom, is going to be crucial in terms of where the diplomatic channel comes from, whether Iran would actually sign up to some of the concessions that the U.S. are asking for, and if indeed Israel would see this ceasefire as a lasting ceasefire or just a temporary truce.
OK, Bloomberg Horizons Middle East anchor Jemana Pasechi on the questions that remain as we continue, of course, to monitor lines coming through from Iran and Israel as to whether or not we get confirmation from those two sides. President Trump, as Jemana was saying, has said the ceasefire is now in effect. Meanwhile, remaining on geopolitics, but switching to Europe, Donald Trump heads to a NATO summit in The Hague today on the back of that surprise ceasefire that he has, of course, announced in the Iran-Israel conflict. The president arrives amidst a push to increase member defence spending to 5% of GDP, a goal the Dutch defence minister told us would be historic.
If we agree to 5% spending on core defense and on defense-related matters, I think that would be an historic step. If you go 1 year back to the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., what we agreed upon is that the 2% is not a target, but it's a floor. So we are now 1 year later, and if we now move from 2% to 5%, with of course a 3.5% and a 1.5%, I think that would be an historic step, especially if 32 allies in unity agree on this.
OK, he spoke to our Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, who joins us now from The Hague, of course, anticipating that visit by President Trump later this evening. Then, where do NATO's members stand? Ollie, get us up to speed on where different members of NATO stand on that defence spending and that target of 5%.
Yeah, Tom, it's worth just sort of noting this moment where we got to 5%. You know, this is something that Donald Trump had sort of floated in his election campaign, his re-election campaign, talking about NATO at 5%. This was basically, I wouldn't say quite laughed at, but completely rejected as a concept, totally unrealistic, and basically, you know, something that the NATO and its many members would never sign up to. And now today, you know, a few months later, it is becoming reality. Now, we should say we know that Donald Trump is a fan of big, beautiful numbers, and for NATO, presenting him with that figure is going to go a long way, they hope, in sort of reassuring the alliance with the United States and the support of the United States. But the reality of that number is it's not quite 5%, right? About 3.5% of that is the sort of actual, you know, guns and ammo, real military spending that we sort of are accustomed to thinking about when we think about NATO targets. 1.5% of that is more to do with things that support the defense industry. So, Tom, think cybersecurity, think about potentially the infrastructure that has to be built around countries, including, let's say, Germany. If you've got to carry tanks across Germany, you need the infrastructure that is able to do that. Those are the kinds of things that you can get to about 1.5%. The other side of this is the timeline. They're expecting to hit those targets by 2035. We should say that probably breathes a little bit of flexibility into things because, of course, Trump's second term is supposed to end at the end of 2028. And so, again, maybe that breathes a little flexibility into it. And, of course, here is still the fly in the ointment, Tom. We do not have every single member fully committed to this figure yet. We still have Spain, the outlier Pedro Sanchez, saying that basically they can achieve all of their NATO targets with only spending 2.1%. If this whole sort of setup were to fail just due down to the Spanish, that would obviously be a massive disappointment. It would be a real catastrophe for this event where we're anticipating Trump to arrive in just a few hours' time.
Well, Ollie, what are the best and worst case scenarios then from this summit?
Good morning. Yeah, I think the worst-case scenario is definitely there's not universal agreement on that 5% target. Trump either does not come, right, or it comes and he's very sort of upset about that, and then basically the NATO alliance is thrown once again into disarray. I'd have to say that I suspect that that is probably a fairly low possibility. But, Tom, even in the best-case scenario, let's imagine a world where everybody signs up to 5%, everybody sort of agrees to the timeline to get there, and everybody basically agrees to buy mostly American military kit because there aren't a huge number of alternatives at this stage. What is the best case scenario for what Donald Trump says to the Europeans? Is he going to do a 180 and say, listen, we're very, very satisfied with you now. We want to pat you on the head and say, listen, we are very, we're going to be fully committed to NATO. There's nothing you can do wrong. Probably not. And Tom, the other thing that sort of hangs over all of this is not just the sort of commitment of the United States to Article 5. There are also 84,000 American military personnel stationed all across Europe. You know, like 40,000 of them are in Germany. You have some here in the Netherlands. The real question is, over the next few months, we're expecting the U.S. to give its new military posture across the world, and they're expecting the United States to draw down many of those deterrent troops that are across Europe. We should say that Biden added to those forces by about 20,000 after the invasion of Ukraine, but the expectation is still that that is going to draw down further, and that is also the other conversation that hangs over this event here. But we should say, Tom, and I think it is worth noting that of all the sort of foreign policy goals that Donald Trump has established for himself, this is one where he's going to be able to say it has been massively successful. And when you think about the average spending of NATO members over the last decade, it's been about 1.6%. We're talking about now 5%. That is an absolutely massive change.
And Ollie, as we continue, of course, to monitor developments in the Middle East, with the airport authority in Israel saying that they have now reopened airspace in Israel. So Israel saying that it's reopened its airspace. That is according to the airport authority. We have to, of course, think about how the Middle East and this potential ceasefire, this apparent ceasefire, of course, folds into the dynamics of the summit that's going to be taking place behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, so listen, I think there are three things here. I think that the first is that the Europeans know that their influence is very limited on the Middle East, generally speaking, on Iran, on Israel, on the United States. They say they can potentially play a sort of diplomatic role, but that is not really an engagement that they're going to be focused on. They're really focused on Russia and the NATO alliance. The second is, it kind of bears on the mood that Trump arrives here with. He's going to be feeling good if this ceasefire holds, but does that embolden him to ask a little bit more from the Europeans and be a little bit more, willing to throw his weight around? That is another big question. So I think that for all of the leaders that are gathered here, they're going to like the opportunity to be before Trump. And again, in the context of the Middle East situation, if the ceasefire holds, I think it could bode in sort of different directions for how this summit goes over the next 24 hours.
OK, excellent preview. Thank you very much. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook on the ground for us at The Hague, of course, ahead of that key leaders meeting at the NATO summit. Oliver will be speaking to senior European officials at that summit this week, including the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, and the foreign ministers of Germany, Latvia and Lithuania. Those two countries, of course, really on the front lines in terms of the Russian aggression and threat from Moscow. Now, a number of the world's largest airlines are feeling the brunt of Middle East tensions, with airspace closures and flight diversions continuing to ripple through the market, though the latest update, of course, is that Israel has said it will be reopening its airspace. So again, this story is evolving pretty quickly. That is according to the airport authority in Israel, reopening its airspace. Bloomberg's Benedict Carmel then joins me now for the latest. Benny, this is fast moving. What is the state of play for airlines in the wake of this? And again, I say tentative and apparent ceasefire.
Yes, good morning. I think you put it right. This is very much a tentative situation. It's a very brittle ceasefire, if we have one. We just heard from Jumana here that this is something they hope to achieve, but there's sort of insecurity on both sides. And that very much is reflected in what is happening in the aviation space. We had the closure last night that really expanded on what we'd already had over the last couple of days. But with Qatar closing its airspace, that was really an escalation that we saw, because Qatar and Doha, the airport there, that's a really big hub that really serves a massive sort of global network. With that closing, really escalating the situation. We're back to operations now. It feels like mainly things are back to normal now. There might be some aircraft out of position, but by and large, we are back to normal. Bahrain, Kuwait, they also closed their airspace yesterday. This obviously coming after Iran attacked the US base in Qatar, but there was enough sort of a head warning that they could close the airspace ahead of time. But we really don't know how this will continue, whether these airspaces will reopen, reclose over the next couple of days and weeks. Very insecure situation for the industry here.
And that volatility, of course, has to be worked through by executives as they look at different routes for the carriers. Which carriers are most affected at this point, Benedict?
So it's really those either that are in the region, so it would be Qatar, it would be Emirates, though Emirates kept its operations open mainly yesterday. There was a brief pause, but by and large, they've kept their service going. There's a lot of those global airlines that fly through this area of the world, and it's an important part of the world if you want to get from west to east and back. So really, companies like United Airlines, like American Airlines, Lufthansa still flying, but somewhat restricted. Air India, which obviously has this huge, massive other problem with the air crash that happened about 10 days ago. They've also suspended most of their international routes for the time being. So really across the world, there was one flight, spare a thought for people flying from Perth on Qantas to Paris. They had to turn back mid-flight. So you're talking almost sort of 20 hours in the air for these people because they couldn't make the journey. Wow. And they had to turn back because it was just seen as too insecure in the region that they wanted to traverse. So that gives you a sense of just how complicated it is to navigate these paths.
Yeah, that's quite a challenge for those passengers. Benny, what is this in terms of longer-term impacts for airlines as they think about that Middle East strategy? And it's been such a lucrative region, hasn't it, for these airlines? What do you think the longer-term impacts will be?
It really depends on just how this plays out. If this is a situation that can be kept under control or can return to normal, then there probably will be a limited impact. If this continues for a longer time, and if you think about Russia and Ukraine, where we've had an airspace essentially closed for more than 3 years, that will have a huge ripple effect on the wider industry, because the flight paths are becoming harder to find. Right now, you have a lot of aircraft passing through Saudi Arabia. You have aircraft passing through Afghanistan, but we've already had the Pakistan-India space closed. So it's becoming more complicated for airlines to navigate these routes. That makes it more complicated because they have to take detours. And for passengers, there will be a sense, do I want to make a booking? Do I want to get on this flight? So any sense of insecurity and not feeling good about your next booking, that will also have a ripple effect. Something we have seen across the industry since the start of the year. We had these crashes in the US, and some near misses, and that really put a knock on a lot of sort of people thinking about their next trip. So if that continues, and if there's sort of a sense of insecurity creeping into travel behavior, into the consumer behavior, that will also have a bad effect on forward bookings, and that's something we'll probably see towards the end of the year.
OK, Benedict Carmel, thank you very much indeed, leading, of course, our coverage of the airline sector. We appreciate that update. Coming up, we're going to speak to the co-founder of an enterprise software startup aiming to transform the technology for digital services, looking to take on the likes of SAP and Oracle. We'll talk about AI as well. That is next. This is Bloomberg. OK, welcome back. My next guest spent 3 decades at Europe's most valuable company, SAP, before deciding to launch his own enterprise software firm, Everest Systems, which aims to tailor business management systems for digital services, and secured $140 million in funding. The company's CEO, Franz Faerber, joins me now. Franz, thank you for your time. What are you and the team at Everest doing differently versus the incumbents like SAP and Oracle?
First of all, Tom, thanks for having me. It's a big honor to be here. Everest was founded in order to solve a problem of the traditional ERPs, right? You mentioned SAP and Oracle, which is they were built for the old industry, for manufacturing, but not for the modern AI and SaaS industry. That is different how we built Everest. From the beginning, we integrated AI and we are building for SaaS, accounting, procurement, HR, and so on. And our vision is very simple, right? We want to give today's companies, the SaaS and the AI companies, a system which works the way they operate today and not how they would have done it 30 years ago.
And are you presumably you're taking customers, you're hoping to take customers from legacy vendors, and if you are they leaving because of cost, because of frustration, because of functionality, or another reason?
A combination of all of them, right? First of all, they are looking for a system which is out of the box, working for their problems, right? And because the current companies, they have 2 choices: either they have a very, very costly implementation and a very long-lasting implementation of these old systems, or they're building what we call the Frankenstein solution, which is stitching together a lot of SaaS solutions and bringing them together by themselves. Both is very costly, is not really effective, and gives them a lot of pain, and they cannot concentrate on their business. And that's where Everest is jumping in.
We've been talking about the global impact in terms of the macro economy. What are your customers? You have a touch point in terms of manufacturing, in terms of logistics at a time, of course, of disrupted supply chains. What are your clients saying about the impact of some of these global macroeconomic factors?
When you look at today's industry, especially when you look at AI companies and the new arising companies, right? All of them are global. All of them are international. And they want to concentrate on the business. When you look at it, especially in the software industry, but also in all other industry, the time to market for these companies is much, much smaller than it was before. They want to have a solution. They don't want to look at configuration and all the kind of stuff they have to do in order to come time to value. And that's what they are looking for a solution for their problem.
Yeah. But are you seeing concern about the economy? Are they flagging concerns about the economy, your customers? Are you seeing any pullback?
Not at all. Not at all. The contrary is true. It's the truth. Because, the time to market, what AI especially is changing in the industry, what we see in the SaaS industry, they are looking for how can we avoid the problem and the costs, which is normally happening with these old and hard systems, right? Having a simple systems which simplifies their processes, that's what they are looking for. So not at all.
How are you integrating AI then into your products? Are your clients just experimenting with AI right now, or actually using it, implementing it, and getting real financial gains as a result of it?
They are getting already a lot of gains from AI. There are three pillars where we are looking into AI. One is really process automation. There they're getting the value immediately, right? This is things of how to make the life of an accountant easier, how to make the life of an HR guy easier. The second pillar is how do we bring business users that they can change the system as they want to change it. And the third pillar, this is a little bit more experimental, is how do we allow our customers to generate their application by their own, or their missing features by their own. These are the three pillars.
Okay, Franz Faerber, CEO of Everest Systems, raising $140 million US dollars, hoping to take on the likes of SAP and Oracle in that space. We appreciate your time. There's plenty more coming up. We'll give you more details in terms of the oil market moves. And if we have time as well, the latest commentary from President Trump when it comes to Fed Chair Jay Powell as he gears up for that testimony later today. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. So President Trump says the ceasefire between Iran and Israel is now in place. We await, of course, confirmation from both Tehran and Israel on that story. But markets are reacting. You see risk on across these equity markets, and oil prices continue to drop. Of course, at one point you were down around 5-6% from the start of the trading session. That has moderated to some extent, but you're below $70 a barrel right now on Brent oil, extending that collapse to near 10% since Trump made that announcement, and since, of course, we saw the Iranian response yesterday. Let's flip the board and have a look at that volatility that we've seen in the oil markets on a 10-day basis, 10-day volatility at the highest level in 3 years. This is the daily spread, the blue lines, the daily spread. That's the blue chart that you can see. And you saw that massive spike, of course, just yesterday on the back of that news. In terms of the actual 10-day volatility, you can see how oil has been moving on the news lines crossing out of the region. So we just keep an eye on that, what has now become almost a normalized volatility around the oil space. Again, $68, $69 a barrel right now on Brent. We'll see how that story evolves. Let's quickly check in on the latest lines from President Trump, targeting again Jay Powell of the Fed chair, who will be giving testimony in Congress later today. President Trump putting this post out on Truth Social saying, too late, Jerome Powell of the Fed will begin Congress later today. I'm going to skip ahead to this. We should be at least 2 to 3 points lower. Presumably he means percentage points, not basis points. Let's flip the board and see what else he had to say. We should save the U.S. It would save the U.S. $800 billion per year. I hope Congress really works this very dumb, hard-headed person over, the U.S. president on the Fed chair. A reminder that Bloomberg will bring you interviews, of course, across what's happening in the Middle East. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.